Up next on Book TV, Obama Ndesandjo, President Barack Obama's half-brother. He talks about his relationship with the president and disputes Barack Obama's take on their family history as it appears in Dreams from My Father. This is a little over an hour.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Barnes and Noble. Obama Ndesandjo, our special guest this evening, is the half-brother of President Barack Obama. In his new book, An Obama's Journey, Mark offers another glimpse of their father, once married to Barak's mother and Mark's Jewish-American mother, Ruth. A Kenyan-born American pianist, writer, artist, and businessman, Mark uses his talents to work with orphans and is donating a portion of the profits of this book to promote art education among needy children around the globe. Please join me in welcoming Mark Obama Ndesandjo.
Hello, everyone. How are you doing today? Great, great. I am so very honored to be here at Barnes and Noble. This is the first time in the United States I've had a book signing, and I am overwhelmed by the interest, as well as the. Oops, I got to stay here, I guess. Okay, is that okay? Okay, great. My book is An Obama's Journey, my personal odyssey of self-discovery across three cultures. And the reason I wrote this book was to tell my story without having other people tell it for me. It's also about my family, a mini United Nations of sorts, but also a family that tries to make a difference in its own ways. And my story actually begins about 50 years ago when my father, Barack Obama Sr., went to Hawaii. And that's where he met Stanley Ann Dunham, the president's mother, and they fell in love and got married. Shortly after that, Barak was conceived, my brother Barak, my big brother Barak. And after that, they divorced, as you know, and Barack Obama Sr. went to Harvard to pursue his doctorate in economics. At that time, he met my mother in Boston, where she was teaching, and they fell in love. And love is a powerful thing, because in 1964, there were a lot of cross currents that were very, very difficult to maneuver and to deal with in terms of miscegenation and black and white and racial relations in the United States. Anyway, my father went back to Kenya later that year, and he invited my mother to follow and get married, which she did. She tells me, she remembers, Mark, when I decided to go to Kenya, my grandma said, "You can't go there, Ruthie, they're all black." But love is a powerful thing, and they went and they were married in December of that year. She had never been on a plane before, but she was a dreamer. I think there are dreamers all over, and they have tremendous force and power and vitality. Shortly after that, I was born. I was born in 1965. So my book starts with Kenya. I call it my personal odyssey of self-discovery across three cultures. And those three cultures are, for a mixed-race person with a bumpy road, Kenya, China, and America. So I will start with a couple of readings, and I'd welcome any comments or any questions that anybody has. Thank you. Oh, I can walk. I was just saying I can walk with this. This is not working, right? Can I use this?
That's for C-SPAN.
Okay, I'll use this one. Okay, thank you. Okay. Kenya, where it all began. Africa is a place of sublime contrasts and savage indifference. To view for the first time a lion hunting and killing, muscles rippling in the sun. To see it pick up the body of an onyx with just its teeth, and all beneath the great blue bowl of a sky that seems to stretch to infinity, is a humbling experience. How do I convey what it means to grow up amidst such beauty and harshness? I can only share vignettes and memories that pass in and out of my consciousness, like sunlight through a diamond's facets. The years, days, and hours shift and blur like a mirage hovering over a burning hot road. Born in 1965, I lived in Kenya until I was 18. The scene of potent events that marked me for life also furnished me with the bricks from which I later built my spiritual house. Growing up there was both wonderful and terrible. Because I came from a mixed-race family, Africans denied me their brotherhood. To my face, children my own age called me epithets I hated, half-caste, chotara, and white among them. At one point, I had grown to believe half-caste was a term of the purest abuse, rather like son of a bitch or a-hole multiplied 1,000 times. Some people used it with a casual familiarity with which one might say rose or chair, but their insensitivity had the same effect on me as a white supremacist's invective. "You're a half-caste, aren't you?" a man would casually ask me. "Leave that chotara alone, I don't like him," my schoolmates would often say. I was a white Negro, or a black Mzungu, Caucasian in Swahili. I was black to all whites, yet white to all blacks, with no middle ground. Unable to bond with my black brothers, I quickly adopted the culture of my white mother and her more polite Caucasian brethren. Although there was a point when most would not let me befriend them, others allowed me to make social advances. For a long time, that was enough. Once stroked lightly, I put the pedal to the metal and zoomed ahead, alone and self-reliant. The next section, just to give some context, talks a little bit about Kenya, and we used to visit my father's homestead near Lake Kisumu. And it was a fascinating place. Let me share this here. Okay. Every now and again, now, who has been to Kenya? Has anyone been to Kenya? Yes, yes. Maybe there's some Kenyans in the audience. Are there any Kenyans in the audience? Yes, sir. Jambo bwani, habari gani? That means hello, how are you? Welcome. Kenya is an amazing place, and Africa is an amazing place. The sky, which curves above you, it's almost like a cathedral. And there's a sense there that you don't change Africa, Africa changes you. That said, when I was young, my mother, my father, and I, and my younger brother David, would drive to Alego Kogelo, which is about 400 miles from Nairobi, and was our traditional Obama homestead. This section starts there. Every now and again, we would visit Alego Kogelo. We would set off by car early in the morning, and after a day-long drive, arrive at our ancestral home. There was a time when the roads to Kisumu were too dangerous for many travelers to use, with a driver having every likelihood of smashing into a parked or broken down bus, of falling into a huge pothole, or of veering off an unsurfaced track. The police might ask for bribes, and robbers wouldn't bother asking. These days, the roads are considerably better, and tourists can cut across the fine Mara Road and bypass Kericho and Nakuru. Our car would pass by the Great Rift Valley and mystic Mount Longonot. I remember spotting by the side of the road, almost hidden behind thick bushes, the remains of the old chapel built by Italian POWs during the Second World War, which is now a refurbished tourist attraction. The land would turn richer, and fields of sugarcane, wheat, sorghum, millet, pyrethrum, and sukuma wiki, or collard greens, would appear in shimmering waves of green and gold. Would see tea pickers and their children in the emerald fields of Kericho, where white colonial farmers once usurped the land from the Kikuyu and Kamba, develop an industry that produced the best tea in the world. I was about 5 or 6 years old then. My brother David was just a baby, and I do not think he came with us on these long trips. except for once when he got very sick with malaria. In general, someone would care for him back home, and my mother would count the days until she could hold him in her arms again. I never understood why we had to leave our home in Nairobi to travel to this poor set of thatched huts where people in cheap clothes and sandals spoke a language I couldn't understand. Not speaking Luo, I felt I was never accepted by the African children. My air of reserve was taken for aloofness and met with disdain and taunting. It was all very strange, difficult, and intimidating. However, there were lighter, more surreal moments. Most nights we would go to the local bar, a one-room house with a single bare light bulb and rows of benches lined against the wall. Outside there were flimsy chairs and tables with lots of beer in huge vats, and men talking and yelling in Luo. The air was thick with the voluptuous, oily smell of fermented maize Congo, and people fought to be heard over the sound of rock and roll playing on the local radio station. My father would forget us as he drank with the villagers into the night. My mother and I would regularly sneak away to a small storage room where there was a tiny iron frame bed. We would try to talk over the din until, tired from the effort, she would get up to leave me. "Mom, let's go home," I pleaded sometimes, when I heard the shouts of men, the clinking of beer bottles, and the beat of bunga music from the radio. "Hush, you can sleep here a bit, and when we leave, I'll wake you." She would gently tuck me in. I did not want to go back to where we were staying. I wanted to return to Nairobi, which I knew and was used to. I would try to sleep, but the noise of the partying was deafening. Unfazed by the harsh glare of the overhead light bulb, the mosquitoes would bite me when I dozed off. One night, the clamor was so loud I had no choice but to come out of the storage room into the bar. I stood glumly next to my father and mother and the women and the men who sat happily gossiping and chattering. Wet wooden tables filled with beer bottles and glasses loomed around me. Ayo! The sound seemed to rise like a ghostly wail from the alien landscape that surrounded me. I looked around and saw the source of the sound, a strange musician, the bugler of Alego, dressed in a straw loincloth, long bead necklaces, and a traditional Luo hat. His distended bare potbelly and jolly face were a terrifying sight. He was weaving between the revelers like a black Santa without reindeer. Ayo! I heard that sound again when he lifted his wooden clarinet-like horn to his fleshy lips. His cheeks blew up, Dizzy Gillespie fashion, to an incredible size. It was as though both sides of his face had been hijacked by shining, coffee-colored soccer balls. I looked in amazement at the two glistening orbs, afraid they would burst. So tight was the bulging skin. Above those bulbous cheeks, his small eyes were narrowed to slits that shone with a maniacal intensity. And then that sound issued forth, high-pitched and yodeling, as if to the very gates of heaven or hell. It was deep, throaty, feminine, and masculine all at once, as it flowed from the pub and out towards the gorges and valleys, thrusting through the streets of nighttime Alego like a hell-driven banshee. Then just as suddenly the sound would cease, and the distended face would shrink back to the jovial, blubbery visage of the old bugler. "Mum, what's wrong with that old man's face?" I gasped in horror. "It's nothing to get upset about. The muscles in his cheeks are worn out. It's normal for him," she murmured, smiling at me. I identified in some strange way with this old bugler. I wanted to be as free as the sound he made, free like Habiba, my father's mother, to fly away over the hills, away from this confusing place. The next section talks a little bit about my first meeting with my brother Barak, and that was in 1988. It was a very intense meeting. I had just graduated from Brown University and was on my way to Stanford, and I'd come back for the summer to Nairobi to stay with my parents. Barak was on his way to Harvard University, Harvard Law. And I remember that balmy summer, I was in my room reading a book, The Devil Drives by Fawn Brodie, a great history of a biography of Richard Burton, the great colonial adventurer. And I heard the sound, the crunching sound of gravel outside. And I knew a car had arrived. And I heard sounds of voices. And the door opened. My mother was in the door. And she was trembling. My mother is a big lady. She's strong. She's a mountain climber. I'm not literally, but she's a person who's gone through many challenges in her life and survived. But she was trembling. It was like there was this emotion. And what happened is she said to me, "Mark, your brother from America is here." And I said, "What brother?" I didn't know. There had been memories and there had been rumors and stories, sort of nebulous things that had talked about a brother I had in America, but I had never met him. And this was a totally unannounced visit. So it was a big surprise. Anyway, I said, "My brother from America, what do you mean?" "Your brother Barak from America, he's here to see you." And all of a sudden, after the divorce, I had shut out a lot about the Obama name. I wanted nothing to do with it because of the domestic violence that we suffered for about 7 or 8 years. I refused to even take the name Obama at that time because I remembered my mother and the pain of seeing her unable and being unable to protect her. But all of a sudden, it's like we hadn't been in contact with other members of the Obama family, and after a space of like 10, 15 years. And then all of a sudden, all these memories and these feelings, they just coursed through me. And I was thinking, all the things I tried to forget were coming back. And I instinctively said, "No, I don't want to meet him." And she said, "He's your brother. He came all the way from the United States to see you." And you know how moms have this way. They can persuade you to do anything. They can persuade you to do anything. And I relented. I stood up and I walked into the living room and I saw this person who looked almost exactly like me with a bigger afro than me. And big gangly legs. And he was sitting on the seat, simple polyester white shirt and cotton pants. And he had these big hands, and when he shakes your hands, it's like the fingers reach to your elbow, that type of hand, right? And he was taller than me, and he stood up and he said, "Hi, I'm Barak," and I greeted him, and that was my brother. And that first meeting, it was a little intense because we didn't say very much, but it was like all these skeletons in the closet were clanking in the background. It's like the elephant finally walks into the room, and you have to confront so many things, marriages, relatives you don't know that well. And anyway, Barak wanted to talk to me privately and with more solitude, and so he came. We set up a meeting for a few days later, and this section talks a little bit about that. It's taken from that section. That's what happens when you write a 372-page book. Let's see here. Okay. Now that I think of it, I wonder why he was waiting for me outside, as though he wouldn't enter the house. All our other guests had always come straight in, sometimes surprising us. Did he refuse to enter? It was as though there was an invisible barrier between his part of the family and my own. They were the Obama clan, living in scattered places across Nairobi and Kisumu, centered around the old man, as many family members later called Barack Obama Sr. But my mother and I, with the help of Simeon, had escaped the squabbling, poverty, bigamy, and domestic violence that had tainted my early life. It was a sign of how secure I was that I faced the second meeting with trepidation. My mind wanted to shut out my past, but it had grown into a menacing presence, a hungry lion hidden in elephant grass. Barak stood in front of a car, I believe a Volkswagen. In the sunlight, I could see him better than I had the last time. He was taller and thinner than me, with a huge mass of unkempt hair framing an angular face. His nose was large and broad, his eyes piercing and direct. His clothes, again, were very plain, a simple cotton shirt and green or pale blue trousers. "Hello, Mark. How are you?" He spoke very loudly and clearly, almost paternally. He didn't smile. It was as though he had recently been upset. I reached out my hand. "Hello, Barak. How are you, man?" We shook hands somewhat awkwardly. At the time I said Barak, as everyone called our father. Many years later, I learned that my brother preferred Barak. He didn't correct me, and I probably repeated this a number of times during our conversation. I looked more closely at this tall, brown apparition that had suddenly appeared in my life. Why so serious, I thought? Had he been dispatched on an unwelcome but necessary mission? His was the face of a person with secret plans and goals. It was discreet, earnest, but very wary of me and my immediate family, particularly my mother. Perhaps an account of what others had told him. From the way he stood in the driveway that bright afternoon, rigid, his head tilted a little to the side as though listening to an inner voice, I saw a person who was searching for something. It was the look of someone who has already decided on the verdict, but is still struggling with unformed questions and imprecise doubts. As we talked later, and we discussed a good deal, I sensed he was looking for something in me, something deep but simple, like a melody among the noise. "I wanted to meet you," he had said during that first meeting. "Let's take a drive. I want to talk to you," he suggested. I still remember my brother Barak's words to me then. "What do you think of our father? What do you remember about him?" He peered at me earnestly. All these years, I had kept my memories of my father far from me. Yet sometimes I remembered my estranged siblings Rita and Bobby, my mother's cries of pain, and the bitterness of the family breakup. I would recall the drunken rants of Barack Obama Sr. and the sounds of whiskey bottles clinking and sometimes breaking on the floor. Some strangers walked by to be seated. Barak looked at them calmly. I felt hemmed in, but grateful for the interruption. In the few seconds of silence, my eyes wandered around the mostly empty room. The glossy red and white walls seemed to shout out, and greasy plates still lay on some of the checkered plastic tablecloths. I remember that Barak had selected the restaurant and thought it ironic that he, not I, had located it. The food arrived almost immediately, spicy masala and rice. Not hungry, I nibbled at a mandazi, a fried donut. I remember how David, my younger brother, who by the way passed away a few years before, and I had used to make mandazis together. We would drop spoonfuls of the syrupy batter into boiling oil. Our mouths would water as we looked at the golden, crispy donuts expand and fill the kitchen with their sweet smell. As though reading my mind, Barak stopped eating and turned his calm brown eyes to me. "I'm sorry about David," he said. "I think you would have liked him," I replied, glad to change the subject. "Everyone I know here speaks well of him," Barak said, his brown eyes suddenly warm. The man sitting... Oh, wait, let me see here. This off-kilter image of myself... Oh, wait. Now it was though... I'm jumping a little bit ahead. Now it was as though my father refused to let go, that no matter where I went, there would always be some relative to appear uninvited in my life, bringing along the memories I had tried so hard to obliterate. I was ashamed of myself for my pettiness and for letting history overcome what should have been the joy of the moment. Despite the tone of our conversation, I truly felt Barak was trying to be honest with himself and with me, focusing on reaching a higher level of self-understanding. In the presence of such honesty, it is imperative to respond in kind, but the shock of it was like being dipped into a lake of ice-cold water. This off-kilter image of myself sitting across from me was my brother Barak. I felt I could hide nothing from him, that there was nothing in my life that I had experienced that he had not, though for him the results might have been different. He looked so like me in some ways, his gait, his face, his hair, even his voice, though his was deeper than mine. I should have been happy to see him, but I was not. Like me, he was mixed race and must have been rejected as I had. Like me, he had been educated in an Ivy League university. Like me, he came from a broken family. Unlike me, he had wholly embraced his African side. Unlike me, he was attempting some sort of reconciliation with something or somebody, even if not with me and my mother. Thoughts tumbled through my mind as I looked at this half-familiar face. If this big brother who is going to Harvard has accepted the Obamas, then why can't I thought. He's probably smarter than me and can discern lies from the truth, including mine. I felt afraid and exposed, like there was something dirty about our kinship, that it was founded on a lie, that we had been dealt a grubby, fragile deck of cards on which to base our brotherhood. Yet the quest that Barak and later I would embark upon required honesty, however brutal it was to ourselves or others close to us. So with all this in the back of my mind, I lashed out at him. Why bring up all that garbage about my father? He was a drunk, he beat my mother and us kids. I've learned to move on. Life is hard enough without dwelling on all the problems of race and bad dads. Barak seemed to flinch, an almost imperceptible movement. I saw his eyes turned hard as he stared at me. It was as though he did not understand. After a moment of silence, he continued with his questions. Had he not heard my outburst, I was astonished. A part of him seemed to have shut out my words, as though Barak was pretending I had not said them. In this way, we were both blind. Whereas at the time I could not see any of my father's virtues, Barak might have formed high opinions of our father, even idealized him. Likely no one had told him the truth, the shameful details of episodes of anger and drink. It was as though he had been conditioned not to explore these matters, having already formed an opinion, clinically and without passion. His demeanor was cold. I felt, then, he was an arrogant bastard, but was too polite to say so to his face. I did not enjoy being treated as a research subject. I did not want to be pitied or ignored by members of my own family. What I really needed was someone to tell me when I was being a jerk and needed to straighten up. That would have been okay too, and we could still have shared a beer. How I would have loved for him to have thrown his arms around me and said, "Brother, your big bro is here. I'm looking out for you, man." I probably would have cast his arms aside, but I would have broken up inside. Instead, Barak said, "I see." I was succeeding academically, but I'd already started sowing the seeds of my own failure. A big brother's advice might have helped me then. I wanted to hit the ball back at me like a tennis ball off the practice wall. That would have woken me up, but it was not to be. Barak was not made that way. He absorbed my answers and digested them, like an amoeba in a vat of sugar. I talked about music and physics. He rolled his eyes. "I see, that's good. But do you see any meaning in it?" "I love music and philosophy. Physics is cool, but Chopin, Beethoven, Nietzsche, and Freud are my idols." "But don't you want more?" he said. Nonplussed, I stared at him. What more is there? Thousands of years of Western culture. There's so much more one can learn from them. "And will you come back to Kenya?" "Of course, my family's here. But my home is where my family is. If they lived in America, that would be my home. However, it would be difficult to get a job as a physicist in Kenya. It's hard enough getting a telephone service here. Who knows?" Barak seemed to sigh. I tried to change the topic of conversation again. "How do you like Kenya so far?" "I like it. I'm having a good time here," he said casually, his eyes on the placemat, his hands casually resting on the table like a poker player's. The next section talks a little bit about love, and it takes place actually in China. Let me see if I can grab that. Oops, the microphone's got down over here. Who's been to China over here? Wow, a lot more people. Where did you, the gentleman in the front, where did you go?
Shenyang.
Oh, Shenyang, okay. Do you know some Chinese?
My wife.
Oh, great. Another international family. That's great. You know, China is an amazing place, and you know, the people are amazingly warm and welcoming. And in many ways, sometimes you have to be away from the things that you're very close to. And for me, you know, although I'm American and I love America and Kenya, at that time, at a time in my life 12 years ago, it was wonderful to go to China because everything was so strange and wonderful and curious, isn't it? Yeah. Let me see if I can find this here. Be right with you. like I said, 372 pages. But it's somewhere here. Okay. Okay. Well, actually, I'll tell you what. While I'm looking for it, maybe you can take some questions. And I'd be curious to hear about your experiences too. And also, I think we can just leave it open to the floor. What do you think, Paul?
Yeah, we have time for about 6 questions. Please wait for the boom mic to come around before you ask your question. Raise your hand, and we'll call on you, and you can ask your question. Okay?
Sure.
So
Thank you.
we're opening up to questions if there are any in the audience. Oh, come on.
Yes.
There you
That's
Go ahead. Have you ever visited the president at the White House?
Yes, I have. The first time we went to the White House was, I think it was at the first inauguration, and the whole family was invited. And I remember it was a wonderful feeling. You know, there was just this tremendous sense of energy in the air. You know, it was optimistic. There was just such enthusiasm. And I remember we went to the White House with members of our extended family, and Barak was there. And you know, it was new for him. This was right after he had been, you know, inaugurated as president, right? And you got a lot on your mind at that moment. And he still had time for us, and so he gave us like a tour of the White House. It was about 30-40 minutes, and I remember we went into the various rooms, and you know, we didn't really know what rooms these were, you know. And he said, and I remember Barak saying, "I think this is called the red room," and everything was red. And then I waited for more, but there was no more. And then we went into another room, and it was all green. And I think he said, and then Barak said, "And this is the green room," you know. And you know, it was interesting because, you know, he really wanted us to be part of that special day. And I remember even walking up the steps to the Oval Office. You know, Kezia, who is my father's first wife, you know, had a little bit of a leg problem, and I remember walking up the steps, and you know, she was walking slowly, and I remember Barak turning and trying to help her up the steps. You know, it was just this humility that I thought was just absolutely wonderful. And at the end of the day, you know, what happens is, even in the presence of such a hallowed institution as the White House, you know, there's nothing more powerful than family, with all its contradictions and all its learnings and teachings. So yeah, that was an amazing experience, and I remember it very fondly. Thanks for asking that question. Hi.
Hi.
How are you?
Fine, and you?
Great. Thank you for coming today.
So I'd like to ask you, you told us now that he really shows that he wants to be, that you'll be part of this special day. But since then, how have you feel this connection with the president? And I have another question, that is, when have you realized that your brother would become the most powerful man in the world?
You know, there are two parts to that. The first one refers to, you know, the relationship. And I think what happens is when you're president, things change. I don't know. I get, you know, when we met before Barak was inaugurated, we had a tremendous meeting in Austin, and it was warm, and it was very welcoming. And I think, you know, at that time, I gave him some of my calligraphy, you know, and he said, "Well, how do you hang this? You hang it this way, or you hang it that way?" You know, because it's horizontal or vertical, you know. And I told him, "Barak, this is the way you spell your name in Chinese." And he was, "Oh, okay." And I remember, and you know, it was the first time we had met, like in about 20 years, and it was just a very powerful experience. But at that moment, as I saw him walking towards me, it was like I was seeing two people. There was this confluence of tremendous energy. This is the potential president of the United States. And then at the same time, this is my brother. And, you know, it's difficult because I see him as my brother, and many others see him as the president. And so when I write in my book that I see that, you know, coming off of Beijing, for example, when he met us, you know, he looked a little tired. and I see the wrinkles in his face, and it does look a little, it looks older, you know. I remember some people saying to me, how can you write about somebody like that? But that's what you see when your loved one comes in after a hard day of work, because they're your family and you see these details. But coming to terms with the brother and the president has been a little difficult. And the second part of your question was?
When did you realize that your brother would be the president?
Well, to me, I knew it way before many of my other friends in, for example, in China and also Kenya knew it. The way I knew it is that, and maybe others did too, who are maybe less skeptical, but you know, at the time of the debates and even before the nomination, there was just the sense of motion, the sense of momentum. And it was the sense of millions of people moving in a direction towards change. It wasn't about Barak, it was about all the people around him. And you know, that was the moment when I actually decided I became proud of being an Obama. That was the moment when I became proud of being an Obama, because you see all these millions of people and you see this movement towards something at that time which was tremendously inspiring. And I said, this is, he made me proud of my family. And at that time, I remember a Chinese friend saying, he can never be elected, he's black. A particular Chinese friend said, not all Chinese believe this, but this friend of mine, who was a very good friend, said that, and I was so disappointed. It was as though to me it was so obvious. But to much of the world, it was an almost inconceivable thing. It was a game changer. I hope that answers your question. Okay. Hi, the gentleman in the back.
How do you come to terms with quotes like Professor Cornel West, icon of political correctness, who's going to stand in that spot in 2 weeks, calling your brother a counterfeit? Or Michael Moore, yes, icon of PC, how do you come to terms with the following quotes?
Okay.
It's a question.
Sure, sure. And thanks for coming, by the way.
Michael Moore saying that besides the fact that he was the first black elected president, Barack Obama will be remembered for nothing by history. Or Clint Eastwood, icon of political correctness, saying recently that Barack Obama is the greatest fraud ever perpetrated upon the American people.
Well, I'll tell you, thank you for your question, by the way. You know, I don't get too much into politics because I'm a pianist, I'm a writer, I'm a musician, and a calligrapher, and I know that there are people who know much more about some of the politics than the details of politics than I do, okay? That's why we have teams of people in government who do these things. But that said, I think to me it's tremendous that in America you can stand up and you can say these things. And the fact that we can still do it, in many other countries we can't do it, I think is a wonderful thing. That said, you know, I think that in many cases people expect, you know, one man to solve many problems, and it's very difficult to do that. You know, the one thing which I think we can give my brother credit for, maybe you agree or maybe you don't, is that he's able to inspire people, and he has inspired people. A lot of people who perhaps were less fortunate than you and me to go to good schools and perhaps also to do things in a beautiful city like New York at the Barnes and Noble over here. But the thing is that in many cases, you know, people like that, they need something. And I've gone around the world and I've seen many people and they've been very inspired by him. Now, of course, there are problems and there are things which he was not able to do, and there are people with strong opinions. That's America. But I'll tell you what, I believe that he believes in what he's doing, and I think he's trying to do something with it. Now, for me, I would say that you know, we have lots of differences. My politics and my brother's politics are probably not very similar, but we have, and also our grandmothers are not similar. His grandmother probably couldn't say "Oi gewalt" or "Oi wegesmeer" like mine could. But the thing is that we still come together, and I hope that maybe in the future, 2 more years, you know, you'll have an opportunity to make another choice, and that's also a wonderful thing about the United States.
We have time for 2 more.
Thank you. I'll take some more. I really enjoy this.
To
Yeah.
the gentleman in the front.
Yes.
Hi.
All of cultural, different cultures.
Hi, how are you?
Fine, how are you?
Welcome.
That you've experienced, which culture are you the most comfortable with?
You know, that's one reason I wrote this book, so that I couldn't answer a question like that. Because my book is about three cultures. It's called My Personal Odyssey of Self-Discovery. And the reason I wrote this book is because for much of us in an increasingly globalized world where we're straddling 2 or 3 cultures, our kids, our sisters, even our parents now, are part of multiple cultures. It's so important that we understand this bumpy road. And I went through this in a very difficult way, and I think Barak went through this in a very, very difficult way. I would say that we're always comfortable, for mixed race kids, they are often on the outside as well as on the inside, no matter where they are. But it's a unique thing. And getting back to your point, I think the gentleman who shared with us some of his ideas and opinions is that one thing which I think helps us in dealing with in understanding my brother is that he has been able to be on the inside and the outside of multiple cultures. And the question is, how do you use that? For me, I've always felt that to be an American is to be able to take different cultures and follow your own path. If there's an encompassing concept about being an American, it's being an individual. And there's a saying in China, by the way, and I'll use it to express an American concept, talk about a contradiction. It's called 做自己的路，让别人去说吧, which means go your own path, let others say what they may. But thanks for that question.
More questions? Well, will you sign books?
I absolutely will.
All right.
But I'm still looking for this section. It's something about my grandma. I don't know if you guys, if you know, but my grandmother, Ida Baker, was an amazing person, and she was a person who helped me understand myself and also introduced me to music. And when I met my wife, I imagined what would happen if my grandma had met her. But if you can just bear with me, I'll find it somewhere here.
I see your grandma on page 318.
318, is that it? This is a man who knows how to read. Let's give him a hand of applause, please. Thank you. Did you say 318?
Yeah.
He knows my book better than me. That's scary.
He's lucky. I don't know.
Yep. Okay, let's see here. 318, okay. It's at the end of a chapter, and it's close. Let me see here. It'll just take 1 minute. Okay.
Are you looking for the quote?
Yeah, there's a part about my meeting my wife, and it happens towards the end of a chapter where we. Oh, here it is. I found it. Oh, great, fantastic. Okay, thank you everyone for being so patient. This is in China, and it's about my wife, Shui Hua, who has been the source of so much and given me the courage in many ways to write even. Actually I wouldn't have met Barak, during the inauguration, during the campaign, if it hadn't been for her. She said, "He's your brother, go and see him." And I took my money, which I've been saving for a piano. This is conviction, or this is, maternal, or how do you say it, is your partner's powers of persuasion. But I used that money to buy a ticket to go to Austin the next week, after a particular event, which is mentioned in the book. And she has been the one who gave me the courage to write, because as all writers know, writing is like pulling teeth. You have to go deep into yourself, and you have to try to be as honest as you can. And it's like music. I play piano. When I play piano, and I play whether it's Fats Waller or a Chopin Nocturne, people in the audience know if it's good music. How do they know? Because it has to come from here. If it's not, no matter whether the notes are right, people will not connect with it. And writing is like that. And my wife helped me understand that. That said, this is a little vignette from China, Shenzhen, Hong Kong. Imagine Hong Kong about a few years ago, and it's China's newest city, only 30 years old, 10 million people. I still have a photo of that ride. This is my first date. I still have a photo of that ride we took to the Xiangmi Lakeshore, just a few miles from my apartment. She sat on the back of my bicycle, as young lovers in China do. We sat on the pier and splashed our feet in the water. In a photo from that day, her foot is next to mine, her toes splayed out. She could wiggle it at will, and I would laugh because it looked like a big radish. Heading back as the sun set and a red glow seemed to burn up Lianhua Mountain, the feeling of her hands around my waist made me forget about classes, work, banks, and making ends meet. Everything. At that moment, I realized I was falling in love. I invited Shui Hua to my apartment one day and gave her a special, my wife is called Shui Hua, and gave her a special gift I'd made for her. I took a bowl of water and handed her a red rose. "What? Why are you giving me this? Look closely," I smiled at her. My goodness, she looked more closely. I'd written Mark and XH on each petal. "Now pick them up and drop them in the water," I said. We dropped the petals and saw them float against each other in the glass bowl. Shui didn't say anything, but I saw from her eyes that she was moved. It did not take much to make her happy, though she did have moody spells. Soon we were dating. I learned that she had recently come to Shenzhen from Henan province and had taken a job temporarily until she could get better work. Her parents were farmers and she had been raised in poverty. Like many migrants to Shenzhen, she had a dream of living a better life than her mother and father. She wanted to do something in sales and set up her own business. As I continued to live and work in Shenzhen, I felt as though my carefully laid plans for earning money and pursuing a corporate career were now vastly unimportant. All my ideas of getting a high-paying job had come to naught. I could have gone back to corporate life in America, but it would have meant leaving the orphans, I've done some work with orphans, and possibly Shui Hua, who even at that early stage I knew would not have been happy in America. I well remembered my own unhappiness when I had left Kenya for America. I recall the time when my grandmother visited and wanted to bring one of our Kenyan domestics back to America to help her around the house. "Ruthie, I can give her a good salary and a place to stay. All she would need to do is help me around the house." How much I want someone to help me around the house, sweeping the leaves from the path every morning. Oi, what a chore. Juliana, or Aya, on hearing this proposal, Aya is our domestic help. No more than that, she was part of our family. On hearing this proposal, was ecstatic. "Kwenda America, mzuri sana." It will be great to go to America. But my mother quickly talked Grandma out of the idea. "Ma, she wouldn't be happy there. She would be away from her people, and it would be a huge shock to her. You should consider these things," she gently chided. "Maybe you're right, Ruthie," Ida eventually conceded. That was that. I loved Shui Hua, and knew she too had strong ties to her family, and to China. I didn't expect her family to welcome me with open arms, but it was still a shock to hear Shui Hua describe her mother's reaction on first hearing about me. She was horrified to learn her daughter was dating a foreigner. "You will leave me and go away with him," she cried. "My grandchildren will not be in China to live with me. I will lose my daughter." Shui Hua was distraught after that phone call, her eyes red and face flushed. I did not know what to say. I had enough trouble dealing with my own family, let alone hers. For now, Shui Hua and I had each other. At times, particularly at night, in that dream state between wakefulness and sleep, I had strange thoughts. The pictures in my mind encompassing images of my youth in Kenya and my present life in China. I felt that I was in a space that was mine to mold into whatever shape I pleased, with no obligation to my mother, my father, my friends, or even that long-departed but ever-present kindred spirit, my grandmother. I could imagine having a dialogue with Ida. "I found this terrific girl, Grandma, and I did it myself with no matchmaker. Oi, don't tell me you fell in love with some schmuck who doesn't value you. Young girls these days, they let themselves be treated like toilets. A man comes along, does his thing, and then forgets to clean up. Grandma, how can you say that? If so, it's the guy's fault. It wouldn't be my fault, would it?" "Oi, Veasmir, of course not. It's always the women's fault. We use men and then look at the consequences." Here, I have some leftover borscht. Want some? I even have a little gefilte fish that Mary brought me the other day. If you don't like that, we can head to the shop down the road and get a corned beef or pastrami sandwich. Grandma, I think I'm going to marry this girl. In my dream, she would come up to me, gently put aside her bowl of red borscht, and look at me so closely I could smell the baby powder on her cheeks and the faint scent of age. Well, if you love her, that's the important thing. If she has a little chutzpah and cooks you good food, that's something. Is she blonde? No, her hair is black. She's Chinese. Doesn't matter. Grandma would give a long sigh. All the world is going to be brown one day. Just love her, and all will be well. Here, have some matzo balls. Oh, I forgot, you don't like them either. And her kind face and wispy strands of ashen hair would fade back into the night, at one with my dreams and the breeze from the South China Sea.